Chapter 36 to 37. The square was packed full of people. Almost anyone that was anyone of even the slightest importance to the Japanese public was there. Everyone from the Prime Minister and the Emperor to your corner department store's ordinary managers were there. That was, of course, besides the throngs of civilians and heroes that attended. It had been 3 weeks since the battle at Kamino. Only now did the site manage to look less like a war zone, but the scars remained. The gorges were cleaned of debris and any foul-smelling odors, but they were not yet filled in. Fallen buildings still ringed the battlefield as rescue crews worked tirelessly to try and find anyone that might be alive. The search was stopped a few days ago when all they managed to pull out for a week in a row were dismembered corpses. In the middle of it all, a small park was erected at the bottom of the massive crater that All Might's final blow produced. A small garden of serenity and tranquility amidst the ruins. It was this place that the hordes of people surrounded. At its center stood a statue of All Might, with his fist raised high in triumphant victory. Surrounding the circular walkway around his statue were 12 monoliths made of stone, more specifically, made from the basalt that I used to parry All for One's throne building. On each slab were written the names of all who died in this fight. Including my mother. I felt my eyes burn, but I shoved down my rage. In the 2 weeks since I awoke, I hadn't used my Sharinagan in any of its stages, bar one time. One foolish time where I declared war against villains. It hadn't hit me then, not really, that what I just did was the equivalent of pointing a loaded gun towards my foot and playing Russian roulette with the trigger. Then, of course, some supported me and my actions, but the larger community of Japanese people now looked at me like some sort of warmonger. The rest of the heroes were no different. Where before I had expected to reach top 5 before winter, now I would be lucky if I remain in the top 10, and unfortunately my escalation of the conflict stood as a possible cause for the increase in villain activity across the board. Unfortunately, even if the truth had little to do with my declaration, people often listen to the one who shouts the loudest. And all of this brings us to this moment. Here, standing at All Might's feet for the nation to gain a sense of closure after the tragedy that had just happened. Izuku was leading the procession that carried All Might's remaining ashes. It was a small amount that was able to be collected. The power of the 8 gates made short work of his body, given that he was already severely weakened. I stood silent for the entire procession. There was nothing I could do right now, but wait and see. // It took hours, but Aizawa stood silently by along with the rest of UA's staff and students. At the very least, Izuku was back with them. The void that Izuku's disappearance and Katsuki's apparent suicide caused almost shattered the cohesion of the group. After all, those two were the hearts of Class 1A. Looking away from where his class was standing, Aizawa directed his gaze at the lone figure standing before All Might's coffin. It was his duty to perform the final step of the ceremony. And yet, Aizawa couldn't help but feel like he had failed Madara. The atmosphere was clear. Madara was alone. The only one that stood by him was his brother, but for the people of Japan, the golden boy of hero society was no more. It was maddening to see just how fast people change their allegiance, how fast they turn on their protectors. Still, they dared not say anything out loud, even if Madara was smart enough to read between the lines. The people were uneasy, and Madara's choice of attire did not help matters. Not as he was dressed in his pure midnight black armor from that fateful day, armor that he had not cleaned or fixed, armor that still had the blood of innocence on it. The red cape he donned over it covered what it could, but Aizawa was of the opinion that Madara did not wish to conceal anything, if only to bring the public to wake up to the true reality of the world. With a few movements of his hands, the coffin containing All Might's remains sunk into the ground, and on top of the place where it sunk, a small pillar of fire sprouted, casting its golden light over the surrounding area. Madara did not move. Not until everyone else had already left. Izuku stayed by his brother. It was the least he could do to show solidarity. He knew that Melissa and her father were watching them from slightly farther away. Madara was in pain, that was clear, and this time it was his turn to help. Izuku stepped forward. Nisan. Izuku spoke in soft tones. Even so, he could see Madara tense up as if preparing to clad his heart in steel, even if for just a moment. Izuku, he breathed a whisper. Izuku ascended the stairs to stand side by side with him. Only now, looking at him, could Izuku see the tear streaks that crossed his brother's cheeks. From the way he was looking, he had been crying for quite a while, but the light and his proximity to the fire let nothing to be seen by any casual observer. All the people were gone. It was only Madara and Izuku here. Melissa and her father were too far away to see or hear anything clearly. Let's go home, Anai-san. Everyone's already left. Madara was silent for a moment, and afterwards, he raised his head and looked at Izuku. Izuku could quite clearly see his stormy dark green eyes that were full of grief. It was a mark that his brother had finally given up all pretense of composure, and all that was holding him together was the last shred of his pride, though even it was failing. What home, Izuku? I destroyed it. Mom is gone, All Might is gone, and everything I have strived to achieve is crumbling before my very eyes. Where is home, Izuku? I can't seem to remember. Izuku grabbed his hand and pulled Madara in a hug. Come on then, I'll show you. // The apartment building looked dilapidated, even though others were still standing and very much intact. Though, it was to be expected, after all their old home was the first place All for One's goons had hit in their search for their mother. At least it was better than the housing for those under hero protection. That apartment was completely destroyed. Izuku watched as his brother moved through the remains of their apartment, running his hands over the walls and looking at old pictures. Izuku and his mother had been allowed to move back after the media had calmed down. His mother had made a request, saying that the apartment they had been given didn't feel like home to her. Do you remember this? Izuku turned back to see what Madara was asking about. He held a picture of their entire family. It was one they had taken after the sports festival had ended. Izuku still had a massive grin on his face, something that Madara easily mirrored. His face looked softer then than it did now, but that was to be expected. After all, no one can go through what they had and come out the same in the end. Izuku walked up to his brother and took the picture frame from the table it was sitting on, running his hands over it to remove some of its accumulated dust. He was right. This was the picture they had taken together with All Might in his Yagi Toshinori form. I do, whispered Izuku. Izuku looked up from the picture and fixed his eyes on his brother. You can't keep blaming yourself, elder brother. It wasn't your fault. It was an old mantra by now, but Izuku felt like he had to say it. Especially now that his brother had awakened the cursed eyes that he had warned him about so long ago. Still feels like it, even if I know in my head that there was nothing I could have done to prevent what happened, my heart still wonders if I could have done something different. Izuku was silent. He just stood there and waited for his brother to say his goodbyes. They weren't taking anything from that house. No pictures, no memories, nothing. That house was their only remaining tie to the past. It had to be severed lest it keep old wounds too raw and open. The moment they were out of the building, the demolition charges went off. The past was buried and the world still turned. // We finally arrived at our destination. UA. Originally, I had planned to use Might Tower as my home as well as my base of operations. My actions in the past few days, however, have put a damper on things. Japan is still reeling, and soon enough the villainous underbelly of society will begin to stir. I had to be ready for the avalanche of people and organizations that wanted All for One's throne as the king of evil. To do that, I needed a place to relax. It is fortunate that I'm still on good enough terms with Nizu for him to allow me a place on campus. A shout brought me out of my musings. Looking up, I see a mass of students barreled towards Izuku. Most of them were crying, and Izuku was crying alongside them. It seemed like an almost sacred moment, one I had no intention of interrupting. This being said, it wasn't long before they began noticing me. It was telling that their posture changed immediately. I decided to nip it in but before it turned out even more awkward. Hello. They stiffened and seemed unwilling to answer. Okay, that's enough, came a familiar voice. If it wasn't for the fact that I was carrying Mime and Izuku's luggage, I would have let my shoulders sag with relief as Aizawa made his presence felt. Sensei. Madara will be staying with us for the foreseeable future, said Aizawa in a no-nonsense tone. Ida had his hand in the air immediately. Will he be attending UA alongside Izuku? No. He is here mostly as an additional form of security, though I imagine that he will be busy enough at Might Tower, so don't harass him. Treat him as you will any other teacher. He just so happens to be your age. So that means that Izuku will be coming back to school with us? Asked the blonde, Kaminari. Yeah, though I may be needed in the field from time to time, confirmed Izuku. The class cheered again and picked him up and carried him inside. Izuku was laughing all the way. I noticed Aizawa approaching me. How are you? I gave him a look. What do you mean? don't play dumb. You know exactly what I mean. So, how are you holding up? This time I let myself sag a bit. I don't know, better? It's still too early to tell, and there's so much to do that I haven't even began to process all that's happened properly. You know that you can request help. I don't think that Hound Dog will turn you away if you ask him. I smiled at Aizawa's concern and shook my head. There's too much to do. I have to ensure that All Might had worked for won't come crashing down the moment the dust settles. On another note, how's Melissa doing? Fine. There weren't any problems integrating her with 3A, though she'll have to take the provisional license exam with the first years. There shouldn't be any problems. Good, that's good. If you need me, you know where to find me, right? Aizawa nodded. I dropped my bags and began walking towards the forested area nearby. I needed to be alone for a while to find my center. I will allow myself this small luxury. // The sound of clashing steel echoed through the training hall. Nearly 40 pairs of eyes watched transfixed as Izuku and Melissa danced together under the ever-watchful gaze of Madara. Aizawa had to admit that the daughter of David's shield had surprised him. Her had honestly thought that she would be like her father, a support technician. However, seeing her like this, dueling what could be reasonably called one of the strongest fighters in Japan now, all doubt vanished from Aizawa. It was even more impressive because Izuku was going at her with his full strength. It was evident that Izuku was the strongest and fastest of the two, though that didn't deter her. Melissa had technique and finesse on her side that would make more than a few pro heroes jealous. They're still going at it, asked a voice from the doorway behind the stands. Aizawa turned to greet Vlad. As it was usual in the Aizawa fashion, he simply grunted an affirmative. How long have they been at it now? 3 hours, maybe a little bit more, answered Aizawa. Vlad let out an impressed-sounding grunt of his own. Aizawa didn't blame him. It was impressive, especially considering that at the level they had been continuously fighting, not even top pro heroes could have sustained the same rhythm. Those kids are nuts, even by UA standard, noted Vlad as Melissa displayed an impressive mastery of acrobatics that were needed to dodge the high-speed strikes of Izuku. Aizawa didn't disagree. Looking at the spectator benches, it was clear that he wasn't alone with Vlad in his assessment. The way she is fighting, it reminds me of Izuku when he first got his chakra. Could it be that she is a chakra wielder as well? That was a frightening thought. 2 chakra wielders have already proven to be a grave threat to any would-be villain, and in the same vein, a threat to the stability of Japan itself. To add another one to their ranks, and so soon after All Might's defeat, was suspicious. No, they didn't add her just now. Those kind of skills need years of training and discipline for one to acquire. It is not something that can be just learned in a month or two. And because she is a possible chakra wielder, that means that she must be quirkless. Did Madara plan this all along? It was a scary thought, but not an absurd one. Madara has shown himself to be particularly resourceful when it comes to long-term plans like that. It would not be beyond his skills to ensure that Melissa's shield walks down a path where she could gather as much of the necessary training for her to truly bloom when given access to chakra. With a final clash, the duel came to an end as the training saber in Melissa's hands shattered under Izuku's heavy blows. Aizawa pushed himself off the wall and headed down to the arena. Now that the spectacle was over, the real training could begin. // Man, I'm beat, said Kaminari as he flopped onto the couch in the dorm common room. I know what you mean, replied Kirishima. Kaminari perked up at the unnaturally gloomed tone of Kirishima's voice. He wasn't the only one, as Mina, Momo, and others also took note of the slight undertone of sadness that seemed to permeate his very being. Okay, enough of that. Ijiro, I forbid you from being gloomy, yelled out Mina. Okay, sure, came the droll response. Mina frowned and pouted. Momo, the ever-diplomat, stepped in to mediate the situation. I know that you miss Bakugo, but you can't go on like this. Yeah, I know, I'm sorry. It's just, I hoped that he would come back with Midoriya, either of them. I mean, you can't really believe that he, said Kirishima. The rest of the class present winced a bit. Bakugo and All Might were still open wounds as far as they were concerned, and not something that you brought us over dinner. I don't know. We only knew him for a couple of months, but Izuku said that it wasn't true, and he was childhood friends with him, so he's got to know, right? Said Mina. The others hesitantly nodded, not wanting to even entertain the idea that the proud hero student that is Bakugo Katsuki would do something like kill himself over this. I guess you're right, admitted Kirishima. Great. Now we have to talk about the new girl that Izuku's been hanging around, said Mina, successfully changing the subject. I know, right, she's so awesome, said Kaminari. And strong. I mean, did you see how she pinned Izuku to the floor at the end? Yeah, but he reversed the situation really fast, though you're right. She's got mad skills with that sword. Guys, are you thinking what I am thinking? The rest if the night was spent doing in the typical teenage gossip mongering fashion, with the members of class 1A being oblivious to their hidden stalker. Madara pushed himself off the wall with a small smile. After all, it was a good idea to unwind some, and what better way to do that than by picking up on gossip and using it as blackmail against his little brother. // The license exam came soon enough. It was interesting to see the reactions of all the different schools and students as my brother and I descended from the bus. It was fun for a while, and afterwards it simply became annoying. The exam went well, even though Class 1A was one member short, though that would be fixed soon enough. It was a shame that Todoroki's previous behavior came to haunt him and cost him his license, but that was only a temporary setback, not something truly career-ending. Afterwards I returned to Might Tower. I wasted enough time and villains won't catch themselves. I will continue the task that All Might left for me, undoubted by what others think of me. For I am the hero they need, not the one they desire. // High in the mountains of Japan, Katsuki had just passed his own test. He was proud of what he had accomplished in the 3 weeks since that day he decided to change the course of his life for good. You are finally ready, intoned the old man, to be inducted into the order. Katsuki grinned. This was his start line. In the dead of night, 2 cars sped towards the old industrial center. They stopped in front of a warehouse. From one car exited the villain twice and a young man with a beak-like mask from the other. So this is your place, how quaint, said the young man in an unimpressed tone. Shut up. No. Sorry, no I'm not. The young man ignored Twice's ramblings as he continued towards the building. Fortunately, Twice still had the presence of mind to open it. Inside the building the remainder of the League of Villains waited as the young man entered. So, who did you bring us today, Twice? Asked Magna. Shigaraki stepped forwards. I know him. My master showed me a picture of him once. He is the young head of the Shai Hasaikai, Kaichisaki. A Yakuza. A Yakuza? What are they? Asked Toga, who was still nursing her injured arm. Allow me to explain, began Compress back before quirks became a thing. The underground was run by a multitude of different groups, the Yakuza being among them. Nowadays though, most are relics, barely scraping by. With the rise of heroes and especially All Might, organized crime became more or less dead. Shouldn't you be celebrating, Yakuza boy? Asked Magna mockingly. We indeed have reason to celebrate All Might's death, but not everything is about him anyways, said the young man in a measured tone. What is more important is the death of the Emperor of Darkness, all for one himself. The change in mood was palpable as Shigaraki pushed himself off the wall and began stalking forward. So you know who my master is, then I assume you are here to join us. Nothing so presumptuous. After all, while All for One didn't leave behind a clear air, All Might most certainly did. The atmosphere chilled. They all knew whom they were talking about. Or should I say his recent actions have forced most of the usual investors in our type of business away, and his crackdowns have begun to hurt more and more criminal groups. It won't be long until they too will be forced in hiding, said the young man. His words were met with silence. To that end, I propose a partnership between our 2 groups, he finally said. Shigaraki stalked forward. You come here, refuse to acknowledge me as my master's successor, and you still have the gall to propose a partnership? He asked menacingly. The young man shrugged. We don't know each other. We don't know each other's goals. My goal is the destruction of Hero Society. To tear down all that All Might built and his brats along with it, said Shigaraki, cuttingly. Well then, can you please tell me how do you plan on achieving such a mighty feat? That's simple, I'll gather my army and crush anyone that stands in my way, blurted out Shigaraki. So, in truth you have no plan then? And besides, how do you plan on taking down Rikudou himself? Not even All for One could defeat him, and he's still a boy. He still has room to grow, and that's without taking into account his brother, whom All for One named One for All. There was silence in the warehouse as Shigaraki finally reached up to scratch his neck. We're done here. See him out. Think about what I've said. With your brand and my plan, we could turn society upside down. // It was nighttime in a small harbor in the north of Japan. A single small boat was approaching the dock in total darkness. "This is it?" asked a middle-aged gangster with 4 arms. "This is it," confirmed the tattooed Chinese man standing next to him. "Good. It is, as always, a pleasure doing business with you," said the 4-armed man as he handed the triad member a black case. "And we with you. If I may, I must say that all this secrecy and security is a bit much, don't you think?" The 4-armed man growled at that. "I am sure you have a good reason for it," said the triad, quickly backtracking, "but the demon and All Might are finally dead. And with all the chaos going around, I would have thought that security measures may have been a bit relaxed." The 4-armed man resumed his usual expression, if with a slight annoyance at the triad member. "Usually they would be, but my client was adamant that whatever is in this case is too dangerous to fall into the hands of the heroes, Rikudou especially." The triad member was silent before mentally shrugging and depositing the silver briefcase in his other hand on the ground. The head smuggler bent down and confirmed the payment just as the fishing boat docked. "That boat will take you several miles off the coast where a seaplane is waiting for you." "Very well. Until we meet again, then?" "Until we meet again." As soon as the boat departed, the 4-armed man breathed a sigh of relief. Another job well done. He called the sole number on the burner phone he was given. "It's done." The ones on the other end didn't even bother to respond as they closed the line. The man crushed the phone in his hand and tossed the remains in the water. Just as he was about to head back, a strong arm snaked around his neck and covered his mouth and nose. Before he could react, a strong electric current coursed through his body and knocked him unconscious. // The smuggler's body fell limp to the ground. As I looked around, I could see that my shadow clones were mopping up the others in this smuggling gang and cataloging any and all evidence to their activities that they could find. I was pretty fortunate to find out about this smuggling ring. Ever since the event, organized crime has seen a significant uptake. While it was true that there had been a surge of low-level crime that happened right after said event, that quickly went away as order was established. Despite the massive crater where Kamino used to be, there has been enough of the status quo preserved so that society could get back on track fairly easily. Unfortunately, with All for One and All Might dead, the blocks put in place against organized crime were suddenly lifted. As a result, there has been an influx of gangs, new and old, that have begun to try and profit from this. Another shadow clone landed next to me and handed me a briefcase before he dispelled himself. I frowned at the newly received knowledge. It would seem that Overhaul's group was further along than expected if they have the pull required to hire such an experienced smuggling gang. And to deal with the triad, no less. Japanese criminal culture was isolationist to a great degree. They were against interfering with the outside world more than they absolutely needed to, but they were also fiercely territorial, with even bitter rivals fighting against outsiders together. In fact, I suspect that this quirk of their culture is what prevented All for One from fucking off to South America or Africa and building an empire the usual route. Note that I'm not complaining about it, but his unusual propensity to infiltrate governments and societies with secret cabals loyal to him was beginning to grate on my nerves. Not that I had many nerves to grate left. Shaking my head, I pushed any unnecessary thoughts out of my mind and focused. The package was retrieved and none was the wiser to it. Now, let's see what exactly this particular Yakuza fossil is planning to do. // For Izuku, the past month had been mostly peaceful. Well, as peaceful as one could get in this day and age. It still hurt that he no longer had a home besides the small room at the mountain compound where he and his brother developed Mjolnir. It hurt even more that he could no longer pick up his phone and call his mom and tell her about his day. He still had nightmares about that night. In a way, it was almost insulting how quickly the world had returned to a degree of normalcy in the aftermath of the battle at Kamino. Nevertheless, it still felt wrong to not hear All Might's familiar "I am here" shout first thing on Wednesday morning as they entered the training fields. At least Melissa was there to help with the pain, even if his brother wasn't. Izuku decided to stop that train of thought before it went any darker. He had already been the subject of an intervention by Mina and Melissa, with Tokoyami accusing him of exuding darkness that ate away at the light or whatever it meant. The dorms instituted by the school at least managed to mitigate most of his and his classmates' mental problems. Still, Kurashima had yet to return to his usual bubbly self, and Mina was constantly hovering around him. The lack of a blonde-haired yelling ball of anger management issues was sorely missed. Still, Izuku couldn't afford to lose himself in fantasies. Katsuki was gone, at least for the moment, despite how it grated him to know that his letters weren't suicide notes and having to keep it quiet. His classmates will pull themselves together. This Izuku knew. They were a resilient bunch, even if a bit odd. He still couldn't explain how Aoyama managed to actually look even more chipper and happy after this ordeal, but it may just be the way he dealt with loss. // Izuku bounced off the ground and retook his stance, managing to parry the sword strike with his gunbai and attempting to counterattack. Unfortunately, Melissa just danced out of his way. This is unfair. How did you even get this good at Kenjutsu? Grunted out Izuku. Melissa giggled. Talent and hard work, I suppose. What is it you told me? With chakra nothing is impossible. Yeah, I remember. Now let's move on. I served enough as your punching bag. Okay. Melissa dropped her stance and returned the sword to her scabbard. Izuku moved to the nearby bench and tossed her a bottle of water and a towel before setting down his gunbai and retrieving a water bottle for himself. So, how is it going with Black Whip? Asked Melissa as she came to hit near him. Izuku shrugged his shoulders before making a so and so motion with his hand. It's weird. They're not that different from the chains of heaven, but it's like they're more responsive and yet, at the same time they're not. Also, they make an excellent substitute for scribing seals with chakra. Melissa frowned. Isn't that good though? You don't have to waste chakra on scribing seals. Not really, I mean not right now. If it was back when I just started chakra training, then maybe, but scribing in the air takes a relatively insignificant amount of chakra and I don't have the best control over Black Whip. It'll be great for maneuvers, though. And weapons. Now I have a true non-lethal replacement for the chains of heaven, said Izuku with a happy tone. Melissa smiled. I'm glad it's going good for you. You seem happier than I've seen you in some time. Yeah, well I managed to get in touch with the vestiges last night, and All Might was there, so I cried myself out in there, said Izuku with a tinge of nervousness in his voice. If you weren't so sweaty, I'd hug you right now. Hey! The two devolved into laughter at the joke. After all, they had been training with resistance seals and without active chakra support, so their clothes were caked with sweat and grime from fighting each other. Not that they cared. Izuku was just happy to not be alone in the moment and he was somewhat glad to be away from Kirishima's moping. He hoped that it won't devolve into full-blown depression. His entire class and Aizawa watched for even the slightest hint of that. No one wanted an actual suicide on their hands. So, about the work studies, Melissa began. What about them? Have you decided where to go? Izuku paused in drinking his water. He had originally wanted to go and join Madara in cleaning up what remained of All for One's known associates in Japan. Those that hadn't been taken in after All Might and All for One's first battle were now bereaved of all support that the Emperor of Darkness could have provided. That and with Japan collective rage turned towards them, and now that All for One was gone it was quite easy to arrest them and then ransack their houses/business in search of evidence. But this won't last. People were already moving on, now that the last funeral service for those that had lost their lives as a result of the battle was over. That path was closed to him. Apparently UA had decided that only agencies with a reputable track record of good internships could take on students in work studies. Mighty Agency, formerly All Might's, now his brother's was unfortunately not one of them and they were unwilling to waive that rule, even for Izuku. No, said Izuku somewhat depressed. Melissa sighed. Maybe you could ask Gran Torino or Night Eye -- That's it, yelled Izuku as he jumped to his feet with a smile. Melissa was confused. Thank you, Mel. You're a lifesaver, said Izuku as he gave her a quick hug and then bolted out the door. Melissa remained there dumbfounded until the light bulb clicked in her head as well. // Mirio didn't know what to think when Sir Night Eye called him and told him to bring a first-year student to his agency. It was even more unusual, because Sir didn't even give him the student's name, only a place and time where he was to meet up with this mysterious first year. It was quite unexpected to see one of the Midoriya brothers there, all dressed up in his armor. For a moment he even struggled to say anything. Hello, senpai. I am Izuku Midoriya. Mirio kept his smile only out of sheer habit. What could Sir possibly want with one of the Midoriya brothers? Not that he had anything against them or anything, but during his internship with the elder brother he saw that his and Night Eye's relationship was strained, and as much as he would like to see only the best in his mentor, Mirio was aware of Night Eye's weak spot for All Might and what he considered to be his legacy. Don't worry senpai, there's nothing nefarious going on here, said Izuku with a smile. Eh? What do you mean by that? Asked Mirio, genuinely confused at the sudden description of his thoughts. Nai-san and Night Eye didn't have the best of starts, but we reconciled. The death of someone we all held dear would do that, said Izuku sadly. Again, Mirio felt a stab of pain in his chest. Was he really that obvious? No, but when you have as much experience dealing with those of the silent stoic type like my brother, you usually get what they're thinking without them saying it out loud, said Izuku. Mirio's smile faltered, this is one scary kid. Haha, I'm sure. Anyhow, I'm Mirio Togata, hero name Lemillion. Are you ready to leave now, or do you want to change? Asked Mirio, hoping to steer the conversation to easier topics. What's wrong with what I have on now? Asked Izuku. Mirio looked at him. It really didn't fit to have his cute, almost babyish face sticking out of a suit of armor that wouldn't look out of place on one of the old dark superheroes from the pre-Quirk-era film that Tamaki usually watched. Nothing, of course, I just thought that you might want to dress a bit more inconspicuously, given that we'll be taking the train to Sir's agency, said Mirio. Izuku seemed to consider this and nod. Be right back. // Night Eye was surprised when Izuku contacted him to ask for a position as a work-studies intern at his agency. To be frank, he would have suspected that he would choose his brother. Still, seeing as UA was unwilling to relax its stringent requirements for which pro-hero agency could take on interns, it warmed his heart to know that he was considered above all others by Izuku for his internship. As Izuku stepped into the office, Night Eye allowed himself a slight smile. He quickly took note of Mirio's strained expression. As unfortunate as it was that he was being kept in the dark, it was a necessary precaution when dealing with the insanity that usually followed the Midoriya brothers. Thank you for accepting me, sir. It's an honor, said Izuku sincerely. It was my pleasure. Now, when we spoke, you told me that you wanted to gain experience in certain matters, could you elaborate? Asked Night Eye. Izuku nodded and lost his cheery smile, his face turning blank and his eyes gaining a glint of steel that never failed to send a shiver down Night Eye's spine. It felt unnatural for this kind boy to seal away his hearth under a mountain of ice-cold steel. Izuku gave Mirio a look. Mirio, wait outside please. I'll call you back inside once we're done here, said Night Eye. He could see the slight shock and hurt on Mirio's face, and Night Eye felt like shit. Once he left, Izuku began to speak. I need to learn how to investigate and take down organized crime rings. While Nai-san is good at that, he's not the best. You helped All Might rip apart All for One's operations before. You're the best for this, said Izuku factually. Night Eye nodded. You are correct. In the past several weeks, we have seen an increase in activity, particularly in the old crime syndicates, said Night Eye. Izuku went to speak, but Night Eye cut him off. And it's not just Japanese crime rings that are moving. Izuku shut his mouth with a click and took a seat in the chair in front of Night Eye's desk. What do you mean by this? Asked Izuku. Madara has not told you, asked Night Eye surprised. He has not, confirmed Izuku. Night Eye observed him. It was a jarring change from the time before to see him like this now. Continue, please, said Izuku, but Night Eye knew that it was a command. Very well. Since the death of All for One, it would appear that his international allies have begun to jockey amongst themselves for control over AFO's empire, and they are not always subtle. In Japan though, it would seem that old groups like the Yakuza have begun resurfacing. The group that my agency is investigating is one of these Yakuza groups, called the Shai Hasaikai. Their leader is known as Overhaul, and in the last couple of weeks, they have begun an aggressive drug export operation, seeking ties with the Triad and even the mob bosses of Vladivostok. With the chaos that is beginning to brew all across the world, most big hero associations are focusing on the big players as well as rooting out corrupted agents of All for One Inch. Izuku nodded. It was the expected response, but in his mind, he was doubtful. If the big players were such a problem, why is Night Eye focusing so heavily on this small Yakuza group? Surely contact with other underground syndicates wouldn't warrant such actions. No, there was something more here. Why are you targeting this Yakuza group? Asked Izuku. Up until 3 weeks ago, it was being run by the old boss. He was someone we could deal with, and he knew his place. It certainly helped that he had a strong code of morals, and he was more interested in helping others get out of the crime life than he was in profits or power. What happened to him? He fell ill. Or at least, that is what my contact said before he went dark. And this happened right after Overhaul assumed command, didn't it? Asked Izuku. Precisely. That was also the time when the entire group shifted in their stance. They began marketing their own version of Trigger, and an improved one at that, one that reaches close to the Trigger sold in America, said Night Eye. Izuku leaned back in his chair as his mind raced with possibilities. The movements of the Yakuza leadership were suspect, but in the current climate, ultimately minor and reasonably expected. After all, there were bigger fish to fry than a small-time Yakuza remnant. However, this sudden production of high-quality trigger shows some worrying signs. "There's more, isn't it?" asked Izuku. Night Eye nodded. "This past week, we have received reports of a drug that is capable of temporarily stopping a hero's quirk. When apprehended, the villains were oddly adamant about keeping the source of this newfound drug a secret. Fortunately, we were able to get our hands on a dealer." "And you found your link to the improved trigger distribution network," surmised Izuku. "Correct. The dealer in question was just a small fry, but he had connections, and he was trusted enough that some of his higher-ups trusted him enough to sell this drug in their name to people he trusted to keep their mouths shut," said Night Eye. "I see, but I still don't get how you link this new drug to the Hasaikai. On another note, did you even manage to capture some of this drug for analysis?" asked Izuku. "We have not. However, the Hasaikai is our most promising lead, and they are small enough to use as a practical lesson for you," said Night Eye. Izuku nodded, withholding a cringe. It still felt wrong to throw his, admittedly small, weight around to get what he wants, but he told himself that it was necessary. Especially now that All Might and All for One was gone. // Changes were taking place in the high tower of what was formerly known as Might Tower. The first to go was the globe-shaped ornament on top of the tower. It still sparked outrage. I sighed as I thought about the protest last week. In a way, people were doing all they could to cling to the memory of All Might. However, despite a somewhat rocky public perception after my blunder, most people understood it to result from my injuries incurred after fighting All for One. I will not alter that perception of events. It suits me far better than the truth. Turning back from the window, I took in the mass of holographic displays. I had several active cases, and keeping track of them took a lot of work. I am somewhat glad for all this technology to aid me. In the past month, I have noticed something highly distressing. My vision is beginning to wane. True, with the Sharingan I could still see clearly, but the edges of my vision were just out of focus enough that my field of view has narrowed. Not by much, certainly not enough to be noticeable day to day, but it was still unsettling. I didn't use my Manjikyu much after the battle, only enough to get a grip over its activation, but the damage was already done. I estimate that I could do what I did at Kamino 3, maybe 4 more times before I go blind, and considering that Izuku possesses no Sharingan of his own. No, I won't go there. If I am to go blind, so be it. I will not propagate the curse of hatred by stealing my brother's eyes for the meager possibility that I may achieve eternal sight. I haven't told Izuku about this yet. This is not something that he needs to know right now. This burden is mine to bear alone, and I will not take what little peace my brother has for the sake of this world. The power of my Manjikyu will be enough, however little or long it lasts. With the technology at my disposal, I can easily create clones of my eyes, and even if the Sharingan will be lost to me, I am still more than capable of fighting without these eyes, so I won't worry too much. All I need is enough time to right the world and eradicate All for One's remaining allies. After that, I can rest. Now though, the mission awaits. If you want to support me, check out my Patreon at https://www.patreon.com/Kaioshin. I tend to polls that decide important plot stuff in my P at Trian. Many thanks to my awesome patrons. Ben Phillips. If you liked the content, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. I'll stay here until next time.